The parrot hadn't stopped screaming for 6 days. Not singing, not mimicking. Screamin'. The same 2 words, over and over, in a child's voice that no longer belonged to anyone in the house. Find Marco. Find Marco. Delia pressed her palms flat against the kitchen table and stared at the cage. Mango, a 15-year-old African gray with a cracked talon and a reputation for silence, had not spoken a single word in 3 years. Not since her grandson Marco had taught him that phrase as a joke one rainy afternoon. That was before the hiking trail, before the search teams, before the sheriff told her, gently and with his hat in his hands, that they were scaling the effort back. She hadn't touched Marco's room, hadn't washed his jacket, still draped over the back of the chair. But now Mango's gray head was swiveling toward the back window, his pupils cycling wide and tight in a rapid, agitated pulse. A behavior she'd only seen once before, during a thunderstorm that leveled the old oak out back. He wasn't scared. He was pointing. Delia called Ranger Dale Pruitt because she didn't know who else to call. He was 53, weathered in the way that men who spend decades in pine forests get weathered, not worn down, just compressed, like old wood that survived enough seasons to stop explaining itself. He'd led 3 of the initial search rotations for Marco and had taken it personally in the quiet way that people who rarely speak tend to carry things. When he arrived and heard Mango, he stood very still. "African Greys don't repeat things randomly," he said. He wasn't talking to Delia. He was thinking out loud, which she'd already learned was just how Dale processed. They assign. They contextualize. Mango screamed it again, "Find Marco." Then he did something neither of them expected. He walked sideways along his perch, stopped at the far left edge, and tapped the metal bar 3 times with his beak. Deliberate. Rhythmic. Like a knock. Dale pulled out his trail map and unfolded it on the table without being asked. His finger tracked the ridge behind Delia's property, the one the search teams had cleared on day 2. His jaw tightened. "They searched the ridge," Delia said. "They searched along the ridge," Dale said. "That's different. Marco was 11, and everyone who knew him said the same thing. He didn't wander, he investigated. His 3rd grade teacher had called it a gift, his mother had called it exhausting. He kept a notebook full of sketches, animal tracks, bark patterns, water flow directions after rain. He'd been on Delia's back trail the afternoon he disappeared, photographing what he had described in a text to his mother as something weird under the cedar root. That text was the last one. Dale found the notebook in Delia's nightstand. She'd pulled it from Marco's bag before the police took the rest. He flipped through it slowly, and that's when the dog appeared in the doorway. Ruth was a 6-year-old blue-tick coonhound belonging to Dale, and she had not been invited inside. She'd let herself in through the screen door, which she'd learned to do 2 summers ago and had never been fully broken of. She stood in the kitchen entry with her nose elevated, nostrils working in that deep, rolling, almost mechanical way that hound dogs have, like they're reading a language everyone else forgot. She walked directly to Marco's jacket, pressed her face into it, held perfectly still for 4 full seconds. Then she looked at Dale with an expression that wasn't asking permission. They moved through the tree line at dusk, Dale and Ruth, with Delia following 20 yards behind despite being told twice to stay at the house. The agreement, unspoken, settled by a single look she gave Dale, was that she was coming, and that was that. Ruth didn't cast wide the way she normally would on a cold trail. She kept low, nose near the ground, bearing southeast in a line that cut deliberately away from the marked search corridor. Dale watched her body language the way a pilot watches instruments. When she slowed, he slowed. When she paused and circled, he marked the spot with orange tape without needing to know why yet. Mango's screams had faded behind them, but Delia kept hearing them anyway. They hit the cedar grove 40 minutes in. The trees here grew close, their root systems erupting from the hillside in arched tangles, creating pockets underneath. Some shallow, some dropping 3 or 4 feet into the earth. The search team had swept this area on foot. But foot sweeps follow sightlines, and sightlines follow open ground. Ruth stopped at a root cluster the size of a truck cab and made no sound at all. That was the tell. Dale had learned years ago, when a coonhound stops baying, stops whining, stops every sound completely, it means the thing she's been chasing's no longer behind a scent trail. It's right in front of her. Marco was alive. He was wedged into a cavity beneath the largest cedar root, his right ankle swollen to nearly twice its size, his body wrapped in the emergency foil blanket from the small kit he'd packed without telling anyone. Hypothermic, dehydrated. Conscious, barely. But when Ruth's nose appeared above the root gap and her warm breath hit his face, his eyes opened. He said one word. "Hey." Dale was on the radio before he'd fully registered what he was seeing. His voice was flat and precise in the way that training makes it flat in moments that would otherwise break something inside you. He gave coordinates, repeated them, confirmed. Then he lowered himself into the gap and wrapped his jacket around the boy without asking, without ceremony, the way you do a necessary thing when there's no time to make it mean something yet. Ruth pressed herself against Marco's side and stayed there. She wasn't trained for this. There was no command for what she was doing. Her tail didn't wag. She simply distributed her warmth against the small, shaking body beside her and breathed slow and steady, as if she was showing him how. Delia didn't climb down. She sat at the edge of the root above them with her hand pressed over her mouth, and she stayed there until she heard sirens threading through the trees below. At the hospital, while Marco was being treated, Dale sat with Delia in the waiting room, and neither of them said much. Ruth was in the truck, legally required to be there and completely indifferent to the requirement. "How did Mango know?" Delia finally asked. Dale turned the question over. "He didn't know," he said. He remembered. Marco probably said that phrase near that window a dozen times, looking at those trees, planning his next trail walk. The bird stored the location, the voice, the context. When the anxiety in the house changed, when the routines broke, when Marco's scent stopped being present. He stopped, reconsidered. Greys are attuned in ways we don't have good language for. He wasn't sending a message. He was trying to restore something that felt missing. Delia looked at her hands. He was grieving. He was doing something, Dale said carefully. Whether it maps to our word for it, I don't know. Marco's mother arrived 30 minutes later, and the sound she made when they told her filled the entire corridor. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't composed. It was the realest sound Delia had heard in 6 days, and she let it wash over her completely. Marco came home on a Thursday. He walked in on crutches, his ankle wrapped, his eyes still carrying that particular hollowness that comes from spending 4 nights alone in the dark, with only the sound of wind through cedar roots and the slow management of fear. His mother hadn't left his side since the hospital. She wouldn't for some time. Mango was quiet when Marco entered the kitchen. The boy crossed to the cage on his crutches, moving carefully, and crouched slightly to meet the bird's eye level. Mango stepped from foot to foot on his perch, tilted his head in a long, evaluating arc, and was still. Then he pressed his beak gently against the cage bars. Marco touched it with 2 fingers. They stayed like that, boy and bird, in a silence that needed nothing added to it. Later, when Dale stopped by to check in and found the notebook back on Marco's desk, already open to a new page, a rough sketch of cedar roots, and the shape of the cavity taking form under his pen, he understood something about the boy that the search teams had already confirmed through a different language. Marco wasn't someone who stayed lost. Some people are built to find their way. The people and animals who love them simply refuse to let them find it alone.